We're gradually heading towards darkness. Darkness on the 7th of July today, so we're about 10 days after I last visited here. And here is Misson Carr, Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust Reserve, about as far north in Nottinghamshire as you could possibly get. Just a few hundred yards or so that way is South Yorkshire. I'm deciding where to site the trap tonight. I don't know whether to go on the inside of the gates this time, just there, or on there. I think that might be the place tonight. There's a very gentle breeze, and the breeze is southerly. It's very warm today, and it's been really humid. In fact, Lassius niger, the common black ant, has had probably the first of 2 nuptial flights late this evening. So we've got very good conditions, and in all probability we're going to get a similar number of moths as we did on the 27th of June. That would be nice, with the odd rarity or two tucked in. I've decided we're going there. It's a good night for mosquitoes again, I can tell you that. But before I set up, I've been asked by quite a few people about the setup that I use for trapping, and it's a very simple setup, and in terms of moth trapping equipment, it's a very cheap setup. To attract moths, 2 types of lights is mercury vapor light, which this is, or this actinic light, which is your typical sort of indoor fluorescent tube. Nothing attracts moths more or better than a 125 watt mercury vapor bulb, and that's the bulb that's in here. This setup I made myself. It's just a simple box, the light on top. The whole thing sits on the white sheet, which you've seen and which you're about to see if you stick with this video, and that's it. We'll deal with the power supply in a minute, but this bulb, mercury vapor bulbs, run extremely hot, and when you start one up, the power has to be regulated. So at some point along this cable from the plug is what we call a choke. Sometimes it's called a ballast, and that's just a small box that regulates the amount of electricity to the bulb for the first few minutes. They take a couple of minutes to warm up, and they are very bright. They're like your security lights outside, and probably brighter, but this is mercury vapor, and the moths just love it, as you will have seen on the last video. So that's all this is. Inside this box is the choke, and that's waterproofed inside there, so no water or dampness can get to it. The bulb sits in a porcelain lamp holder. It's no good having a plastic lamp holder like you will have in your house. They'll melt within a minute or two of this bulb warming up. And to protect the bulb from any rain is this glass top, and that's just the glass part of a cafetiere. So all in all, this is a cheap setup. You can spend several £100 and get a Robinson MV setup. This is cheaper, and if you know a little bit about electrics, or you know an electrician, it's very easy to wire one of these up. And the wiring, I'm not going to go in case I breach some YouTube regulations and someone does something that I didn't tell them to do and blows themselves up or electrocutes themselves. But it is a very simple wiring system, and that's all the trap is. Now, I've never been one for leaving the trap on all night. I've always been happy and preferred to stay with the light and watch my moths come in. Quite often a trapping session will only last a couple of hours, but here It's 4 hours. That's what I've been asked to do here. And the moths aren't collected in any way to this trap. But when I originally made this box trap in 2003, it was a larger box, and two tops of the box were angled in, and this bulb was suspended on a spar across those so that moths were attracted to the light and then were funneled into the box below. Dillis and I didn't like that, because at the end of the trapping session it added another hour and another half an hour or an hour, depending on how many moths were inside, to the session. We could have been home and in bed in the best part of that time. So this was the adopted method that we preferred. A lot easier to pack up. You're monitoring the moths as they come into the light, so when you go to switch the light off just before, it's just a quick case of checking to see whether you've missed anything interesting. And then, as you've seen on several videos before in the past on this channel, it's a case of switching the light off and packing the whole lot up and going home. So that's the light. Now, to power your light, you need one of these. This is half the weight of the old generator that I had, and it's great. It's a new one. This was bought for me, and it's a lot quieter than the old generator that I had, so it's a lot easier for me to wheezily carry around. But great as well, it's a lot more fuel efficient. But you need something like this. I mean, one of these will set you back about £300. It's a great investment. There will be many people, if you ask them about moth trapping, that will say, yes, you want such and such and such and such a generator. How much are they? Well, they're £700 or £800. Don't waste your money on them. Get something like this. A lot more affordable, nice and light, and will do the job. No good spending a load of money just in case you end up not liking the hobby. And that's it. And then you need one final thing. That's somewhere to trap your moths. If you trap at home, you don't need one of these things. You just plug your MV or your actinic light into the mains and off you go. Well, it's 2200 hours and we're away. See what we get this evening. Well, one thing's for certain, we'll be swamped again by both Chrysatutia colmella and Agrifola straminella, and probably one or two other of the grass veneers. I expect the white sheet to be very similarly filled to the last session, and it is warm. It's more humid than the last session. There's a light breeze, and that will probably drop down a little bit, but excellent conditions all around. So we'll see what drops in. Now here's an absolutely beautiful and large moth as well to open up proceedings. This is a buff tip, very appropriately named, and those buff markings on the ends of the wings here, coupled with that almost darker buff coloured thorax, help to give the moth its camouflage when the moth is resting lengthways on a dead twig, because the buff markings of the thorax and the end of the wings give the impression that that twig is snapped, and the moth is very well camouflaged indeed. It's not moth that I catch regularly. I think I did get one here late on last time I was at Misson, and at home it's an occasional species that will drop into the trap. So that's a buff tip, beautifully marked. The rest of the moth is almost a silvery grey, slightly metallic in certain light. It's a cracking thing. Well, the sheet's getting steadily busier. We're an hour and a half into the session. The big difference between tonight and 10 nights ago is the lack, or general lack, of grass veneers. I was expecting similar numbers again, but at the moment, no. But there are plenty of moths. We're just approaching about 60 species. I'm pretty happy with that after an hour and a half. Nothing rare, that's coming yet. The most unusual is one I haven't filmed, and it's hardly sparkling. It's a pug, and it's Valerian pug. And I had one in the last session which I didn't show because I hadn't ID'd it at the time, but I will drop a photo of it in here and say, don't expect a deal. It's a pug, and many pugs look like this, what you're looking at now. But there is a really good range of moths, and there's some different species coming in. Blackneck is in, but only one so far. But a different turnaround of moths. Who knows what's going to come in? As you can see, it's still quite breezy, and I need to start and check to see what's on the sheet. Well, even though it's only 10 nights ago, this session is very different, has a very different feel in terms of the moths that are on the sheet. 10 days ago, quite a number of species that we didn't get then have appeared in that time, and at the moment there are a number of species that we had 10 nights ago that aren't on the sheet as yet. That's how it goes. The dry, fine weather makes a big difference. It certainly shortens the flight period of many moths, and that's what it's done again this year, despite the fact that we have had some rain. But that looks like the first mother of pearl that I can see on the sheet. But a good range of moths. There's a lovely moth on there. It's a micro moth, and I'll drop a photo in here rather than try and muck about trying to film it. And it's Hedia siliciella. It's a cracking thing. It's large for a tortrix. And it's one of the so-called bird dropping moths, because they use the camouflage of appearing like a bird dropping in order to avoid predation. But it's a beautiful moth, and there's a number of other species as well. I'm trying to think of species that are here that I haven't showed you yet, but let's see what's on there. A mother of pearl is one, an absolutely beautiful moth. And that's just on the sheet at the back of the light now. Large twin spot carpet. That's one we haven't had this year. I'll put a photo of that in here. Hopefully, as the night goes on, we may well get a chance to film some of these, but at the moment it's proving difficult. The moths are very active. I think it's time to have another look on the sheet. Now, this moth might not look anything at all, and indeed it is completely concolorous with no markings whatsoever, but it's just the general sheen and appearance of this moth that gives it away as being a fen wainscot. This is one of those moths that you'll look at in the books, and you'll keep checking through your common wainscots and your smoky wainscots, hoping for this species. But it's one of those moths that you'll know instantly that it's a fen wainscot, and that's hard to explain why. But this moth, as you can see, it has a real sort of satin, almost glossy luster to the wings. The wings are completely concolorous, but towards the back end of the wings, bottom of the wings, as you look at it on this angle, it does go slightly brown, almost as if it's been slightly scorched. This isn't that common a moth in Nottinghamshire, and it is wide ranging though, so although called a fen wainscot, moths such as this that are typically wetland species do have a habit of turning up miles from the nearest water source. So that's fen wainscot. I've probably not convinced many of you that it is easily identifiable, but it's that sheen on the wings There's no other wainscot, at least that I've seen, that has that glossy sheen. I'm going to try and film this before it gets splattered by something else, but just look at this for a moth. Absolutely beautiful. And this is a scallop shell. This is not an everyday moth here in Nottinghamshire. I've only trapped it on probably a couple of occasions, one at home, and it was one of those instances of the last moth that came in just as I was packing up and just as dawn was breaking. What a beauty this is. It might do your eyes in. Fabulous thing. There's nothing else like it in the UK, so it's impossible, even very worn specimens, to mix it up with anything else. An absolute gorgeous moth. Fabulous thing, isn't it? Well, the general moth activity isn't as high as 10 nights ago, though there's obviously plenty of moths in and coming in, as you can see. It's just a different range of species, really. That breeze has finally dropped quite a lot, but there are plenty of moths, and we've had some nice moths. Just it's not been possible to show you them all, or to have the opportunity to film them, but there's a good selection on the sheet. I don't know what the time is now. I suppose we're just past the midnight hour into the early morning hours. The quail has just started singing again a little bit. We'll see what transpires. But I'm having trouble filming near the light. The camera's sort of making the light oscillate, so it would do your eyes in. It does my eyes in, so I've had to resort to fewer shots or have the light to one side in order to get a decent picture. But it's another good night here at Misson Carr. This really is an absolute fabulous place. Once again, a very impressive sheet, but we've not got the march of the grass veneers going up the sheet constantly as we had 10 nights ago. We're just after 0:40, so soon be coming up towards 3 hours of the session, and again it's just flying by. It's so busy, there's so much to write down, new species coming in all the time, and we're fast approaching 90 species. There's been some new species to me, one of which is Anania lancialis, and that's a moth I've not had before, and it's not common in Nottinghamshire. The Idle Valley seems to be the stronghold, or the only place in the county where that species occurs, so it's nice to get that here. Probably not entirely a surprise, but very nice all the same. It's not a fabulously coloured moth, but it's beautifully marked, as you can see from the photo that I've put in. But plenty of moths on that sheet as another yellowtail comes in, and a large yellow underwing is going to come in and be a complete thug, which large yellow underwings tend to be. You'll even boss around and beat up poplar hawk moths. And the quail is still calling. Well, here's a moth that I haven't showed you before, and this is a dark umber. This isn't a common moth, and probably only the third, maybe fourth time that I've trapped it, and this, to be honest, is probably one of the better marked ones that I have trapped. You can get the general idea of how this moth looks, or would look if it was in pristine condition, which this one isn't. They always seem to come into the trap in a rather sorry and forlorn and very worn state, but it's a nice moth to get on the list. So that's a dark umber, And say, it will turn up in suburban traps. I've had this at home, but it's far from common. As you've seen, it's a very busy sheet. In a way, I suppose it's good that there aren't the number of grass veneers as we had the other week. We've still got a sheet full of moths, but very different moths on the whole. But there's some odd flight times with some species of moths. There's odd moth that's turned up that's either a late emergent from the first brood or a very early emergent from the second brood. It's very strange, and it's all down to the weather. There's a lattice heath that's been in, and I thought we'd done with lattice heath a few weeks ago, but one's decided to make an appearance, and it's hard to label it first brood or second brood. On the whole, in the UK, I don't know what it's like in other parts of the world, but the first dates for many species have got earlier in the last 20-30 odd years. It makes you wonder where it'll all end. Did you see that one viciously attack me then? But it's just great to see so many moths on here. And continually coming in. And the quail's getting nearer again. You might even be able to pick it up over the sound of the generator. Time for another look, see what's dropped in. We've had quite a few pugs this evening, 2 or 3 that I've got to take back. One is certainly Valerian pug, but it's a much better marked moth than I took and turned up on last week or the other week's trapping session here. But it's not just moths that are coming in. There's quite a few beetles as well. There's an enormous caddisfly. It's just on the sheet directly walking down towards the light. It's a species I've not seen before, but I can't get into everything, and yet it will be a very easy species to identify. There's a nice range of species, and I still think that something else is going to come in. We are over 100 species now, about 103 when I last counted. So this is some night. On the last session I did from Misson Carr, ended up, I think it was 108 species, and we're going to beat that, I think, quite easily. It's just a case of me picking them out. Just part of the sheet and the moths that are on it. I mentioned Hanania lancialis, didn't I? Well, that's it there. Very similar to mother of pearl, but narrower winged, and it is called the long-winged pearl or some daft common name like that. But that is mother of pearl. which the taxonomists have been around and meddled with. So it used to be Pleuroptera ruralis, but it isn't now. It's still ruralis, but they've mucked around with it. They won't leave anything alone. But it's so nice to see a sheet with so many moths on it. Well, here's a moth just starting to become active again, so I best talk about it. But quite a beauty this is, and there's a number of these, and this is brown line bright eye. Just to confuse things, there is a moth called a bright line brown eye, but the two are very different moths. Beautifully marked, a real sort of rich chestnut brown, quite a bright brown, conspicuous white mark in the centre of the forewings, and then the two cross lines going across each of the forewings. In my experience, it's not a terrifically common moth, to be honest. Certainly not one that I've trapped on many occasions. Had it once in the garden, and at Ekrin it's very unusual. Here though, we've had 4 or 5 this evening. So that's brown line bright eye. It's a real nice, beautifully chestnut moth. Well, it's rather akin to looking at a bomb site, to be honest. But when the work area is untidy, it usually means, and indeed does mean, that there's lots of moths and it's a good night. But I need to just flatten that sheet out a bit on the bottom. But yet again, another night, lots of moths. Not going to be as many moths as the last visit here, and that's purely because there's not so many grass veneers, but plenty to keep us occupied. And an ever increasing list. There's still moths coming in. White satin, there's one moth that has come in, large broad bordered yellow underwing. There's a second one just appeared. It's a large moth just above the light on the back of the sheet, sort of zigzagging its way up. But plenty of moths. And the moths still keep coming in. We're just after 1:45. Fabulous range of species. I've already got more species in the notebook than what I ended up with on the whole overall of last trapping session that we did here. I think they're already in the region of probably about 105 to 110 just looking at the book. And then I've got a container full of containers, all with something that wants identifying or I'm taking back just to get better photographs of. And all the time the moths are coming in. A few more months and scenes like this will be a distant memory as we get into the autumn. So if you can at the moment, get out, especially while we've got temperatures. And there's a fabulous large emerald, look. This beautiful large green moth. If that settles down, which it has, we may well be able to show you that. Probably greenest moth and our largest greenish moth. It's an absolute belter, I tell you. This really is the place that I expected it to be. Well, it's time for one final look amongst this lot for something that I've missed or is tucked at the back of the trap. We're just a few minutes off 2 o'clock. But look at the amount of flies that's here. Absolutely incredible. Now I'm getting covered in flies. Well, it's gone 2 o'clock. I need to start and pack up and head home. And I don't like having to do this. Well, there's not a deal of battery power left. It's beautifully quiet. I'm just about to leave now, and it's just gone 20 past 2 in the morning. An absolutely beautiful night. And the sky is starting to lighten in the north. It's going to be a lovely drive home.